The drill stopped at 3,412 meters below the surface of Antarctica, and Dr. Elias Vance knew immediately that something was wrong. Not wrong in a dangerous way, not wrong in a way that made him want to run, wrong in the way that a man feels when he opens a door and finds a room that should not exist. A cold, quiet, impossible wrongness that lives somewhere between excitement and fear and refuses to be either one fully. He pulled up the drill sensor data on his tablet and read it 3 times. The drill had not broken. The drill had not hit bedrock. It had hit something smooth, something completely flat, something that registered on the density scanner as no material currently listed in any database he had access to. He called down to the surface camp through his headset. "Mara," he said, keeping his voice even. "No, I need you to run the density scan again from your end." There was a short pause. He could hear Mara typing. "It's already run," she said. "I saw it from up here." "Elias, what did you hit?" "I don't know," he said. And that was the most honest answer he had given anyone in 17 days. The excavation at Station Omega 7 had begun as a follow-up to something boring, a set of gravitational anomaly readings picked up by a deep survey satellite in 2031 had flagged the region for further study, and for 3 years the flag had sat in a queue behind other, more urgent scientific projects. Antarctica was cold. Antarctica was remote. Antarctica was expensive to work in. But the anomaly did not go away. It did not shift or fade the way geological anomalies sometimes did. It stayed exactly where it was, constant and patient. She read as though it were waiting for someone to notice it properly. So Vance came. He was a xenoarchaeologist by training, which was a field that had become significantly more crowded since humanity made first contact with 2 separate alien species in the 2000s. Though both of those species had been roughly as technologically advanced as Earth, and neither of them had produced anything particularly ancient or mysterious. Vance had spent most of his career studying pre-contact sites on Earth itself, looking for signs that humanity had been visited before those official first contacts. He had found very little. He had never stopped looking. He was the right person to find what was under the ice. He just did not know it yet. For the next 6 hours after the drill stopped, Vance and his team of 4 worked carefully. They widened the bore shaft, lowered better sensors, and mapped what they could reach. By midnight, they had a partial picture. The structure beneath the ice was enormous. The lateral scans suggested it stretched at least 4 kilometers in one direction, and possibly further than their equipment could reach in the other. It was buried under 3,400 meters of accumulated ice, which meant it had been there for a very long time. At minimum, tens of thousands of years, possibly much longer. The ice above it had formed naturally around it, which ruled out a recent burial. The surface of the structure was perfectly smooth. No seams, no bolts, no welds, no oxidation, no damage of any kind. Whatever it was made of, it had spent thousands of years under enormous pressure and weight in the coldest place on Earth, without a scratch. Vance sat on an equipment crate in the drilling module at 1 o'clock in the morning and stared at the photographs from the deep camera. He had sent everyone else to bed. He needed to think, and he thought better alone. The structure was not rock. It was not ice. It was not any metal or composite that humanity had ever produced, but it was shaped. It was deliberate. Every angle was intentional. There were edges that met at exact geometric precision. And there, at the very edge of what the camera could capture before the shaft ended, there were markings on the outer surface, engravings. Vance zoomed in until the image broke apart into pixels and then zoomed in anyway, as though stubbornness could improve the resolution. The markings were clearly text of some kind, a series of symbols arranged in what looked like horizontal lines. He could not read them. He had never seen anything like them. But they had a rhythm to them, a pattern, the way all written language has a pattern when you look at it long enough. He opened a photograph editor and began tracing the symbols by hand, enlarging each one and comparing it to every known prehistoric script in his database. Proto-Sumerian, Vinca symbols, the Indus Valley script, the Dispilio tablet. None of them matched, but there were echoes, small structural similarities in the way some symbols were shaped, as though every human writing system was a distant, simplified relative of whatever this was. He worked through the night. By 4 o'clock, he had traced 17 distinct symbols and found partial structural matches in 6 different ancient human scripts. By 5:30, he had a working theory, which he knew was almost certainly wrong, but which he could not stop thinking about. By 6:45, when the pale gray light of the Antarctic morning pressed against the module windows, he had made a guess at what one line of text might say. It was not a sentence. It was more like a phrase, an instruction, the kind of thing you put at the beginning of something important. He read it aloud, quietly to himself, because that is what archaeologists do when they think they have found something. They speak it into the air and see if it sounds like language. What happened next was not something he could explain later in any scientific report. The structure, 3,412 meters below him, pulsed. One single, offered deep vibration that moved up through the ice and through the drilling module floor and into the soles of his boots and up through his spine and into the back of his teeth. It lasted perhaps half a second, then it was gone. Every instrument in the module spiked and flatlined and came back online. Vance sat very still for a long time. Then very slowly, he looked at the deep camera feed. The markings on the structure's surface were glowing. Not brightly, not dramatically. A soft amber light, the color of embers an hour after a fire has gone out. Steady, patient, warm. "Oh," he said to no one in particular. "Oh, that's not good." Commander Yara Osei was in the middle of a budget meeting when the first alert came in. She was the head of Earth's Unified Defense Force, a position that involved considerably more paperwork than anyone imagined when she first applied for it 11 years ago. The budget meeting was about maintenance costs for the orbital defense stations, and she had been mostly paying attention, which was more than could be said for the 3 admirals sitting to her left. Her personal comm unit buzzed. She glanced at it. Satellite alert. She dismissed it. Satellite alerts came in dozens per day, most of them nothing. It buzzed again. A different satellite. She frowned. It buzzed a third time. A third satellite. All 3 at once now. A triple alert tone that she had heard in drills but never in her 10 years of active service heard for real. She stood up and left the meeting without saying a word. The admirals watched her go. One of them reached for his own comm unit and went pale. And in the operations center 2 floors below, every screen was active and every technician was talking at once. Osei walked to the main display and looked at it and understood immediately why everyone was talking at once. At the edge of the solar system, past the orbit of Neptune, 40,000 objects had dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the space of 90 seconds. They were not asteroids. They were not debris. They were ships, massive, angular, organized in a formation so precise it could only be military. Each one read on the sensor arrays as heavily armed. Each one was broadcasting a signal on a frequency that Earth's contact protocols flagged immediately as Varrock Empire origin. The Varrock Empire was not one of the 2 species humanity had made official first contact with. The Varrock Empire was something else. Earth's xenodiplomacy teams had been tracking Varrock expansion signals for 7 years, watching them consume smaller civilizations at the edge of their territory, always moving outward, always getting closer. The reports had been filed. The concerns had been raised. Nobody had taken them seriously enough. 40,000 ships. Osei looked at the count twice. 40,000. Earth's entire defense fleet was 300 vessels, and half of them were in the inner system. "Are they hailing us?" she asked. "No, Commander," said the technician nearest to her. "They're scanning. Deep electromagnetic sweeps. Mapping us." "They're not announcing themselves," said Admiral Patel, who had followed her from the meeting. "They're casing the place." "Yes," Osei said. "They are." She was already thinking 3 moves ahead. She did not panic. Oh, she had always been constitutionally unable to panic, which was either a great advantage or a profound character flaw, depending on the situation. She was not yet sure which this was. Her comm unit buzzed again. This time it was a call from Antarctica, from a Dr. Elias Vance, xenoarchaeologist, who was apparently very far from his normal excavation shift hours, and who had filed an emergency research flag 20 minutes ago. She almost dismissed it. She had 40,000 enemy warships on her screen. Something made her answer. The United Nations Emergency Defense Council convened within the hour. 22 people in a room that was built to hold 40 because there had not been time to find 40. Senator Haranomo sat at the far end of the table. A thin man with careful hands and a face that had already decided what it thought before anyone had spoken a word. Osei briefed them in 7 minutes. She showed them the sensor data. She showed them the formation. She showed them the Varick Empire's expansion history, the 6 civilizations they had absorbed in the last 30 years, the 2 they had simply erased when absorption proved difficult. She did not soften any of it. 300 ships, Nomo said when she finished, against 40,000. Yes, Osei said. Then we have to talk, Nomo said. We have to open a channel and we have to talk to them, and we have to find a way to make this not a military situation. They are not hailing us, Osei said. They are scanning us. Then we hail them. Senator, Osei looked at him steadily. Mwahi, you do not hail someone who is pointing a weapon at you and start by asking how they are. You find out what you have in your hands first. There was a brief silence. What do we have in our hands? Asked one of the other council members. Osei's comm unit was already open. That is what I am about to find out. She connected to Vance again. He had been waiting. He answered before the first full ring. I found something, he said. He was breathing fast, but his voice was controlled. Under the ice, something very old, very large. And it responded when I... He paused. It responded to me. It's active. It's been active for about 2 hours now. The surface is glowing. Dr. Vance, Osei said carefully, what exactly did you find? I think... He stopped again. The sound of him choosing his words very carefully came through the line. Watch, I think I found something that someone buried here a very long time ago. And I think they buried it here because they thought they might need it someday. Need it for what? Osei asked. Vance looked at the amber glow still spreading across the structure's surface on his camera feed. He thought about the line of text he had read aloud. He thought about what it might mean, translated roughly, imperfectly, from a script 8,000 years old. For exactly this, he said. And then every communication system on Earth, every radio, every television, every phone network, every satellite uplink, every emergency broadcast channel carried the same sound at the same moment. A voice, calm and deep and speaking in every language simultaneously, not sequentially but all at once, the way a memory arrives rather than the way a message is sent. The council chamber fell completely silent. The voice said, the enemy has returned. I have been waiting. Shall I begin? 11 words. In 240 languages, all at once, all identical in meaning. Then silence. Everyone in the council chamber looked at Osei. Osei looked at the screen. 40,000 ships sitting at the edge of the solar system, scanning. She thought about what she knew. She thought about what she did not know, which was considerably more. She thought about a structure buried under 3,412 meters of Antarctic ice that had been there, by all evidence, for thousands of years, and had somehow anticipated this exact moment well enough to bury itself there and wait for it. Whatever that thing was, it was not asking for permission out of weakness. It was asking for permission because it had been built by human beings, and it knew that human beings needed to be asked. She thought about all of this in the space of perhaps 4 seconds. Then she said the only honest thing she could say. Not yet. The voice did not answer, but the amber light on Vance's camera feed, 3,412 meters below the Antarctic ice, pulsed once, softly, warmly, as though it had heard her, as though it approved, and it waited. Because whatever it was, whatever it had been built to do, it was very, very good at waiting. In the outer solar system, the Varick fleet completed its initial scan of the third planet and began moving inward, slowly, methodically, the way a hand moves towards something it already knows it is going to pick up. Sir Arch Admiral Soveth stood on the bridge of the Eternal Supremacy and watched the blue planet grow larger on the tactical display. He had been told it was a primitive world, a minor civilization, a footnote in the expansion record. He saw nothing to suggest otherwise. He was the finest military commander the Varick Empire had produced in 3 centuries. He had absorbed 11 civilizations and erased 2. He had never lost a campaign. He had never even come close. He looked at the blue planet with its tiny collection of defense ships and its one large moon and its cluttered orbital stations, and he felt something he rarely felt. He felt bored. He told his adjutant to begin drafting the standard absorption offer. 48 hours to respond. 2 options, surrender or erasure. He had given this speech before, and he would give it again to the next world after this one and the world after that. He did not notice that 17 of his long-range sensor buoys, positioned in the outer system for navigation and communication relay, had gone silent in the last 2 hours. Equipment sometimes failed. It was not worth his attention. He did not know, as he watched the blue planet on his screen, that something beneath its ice had been listening to the sound of his engines since the moment his fleet dropped out of FTL travel. Something old, something patient, something that had spent 2,000 years doing nothing but thinking, and that had, in the 90 seconds it took his fleet to arrive, already begun. He did not know any of this. He would. The elevator did not exist 24 hours ago. And that was the first thing Vance noticed when the drilling team widened the bore shaft enough for a person to descend. At some point during the night, while the amber light was spreading across the structure's surface, and every instrument in the module was reading impossible numbers, a panel in the structure's outer hull had opened, cleanly, silently, as though it had always been meant to open. Inside the panel was a vertical shaft, and inside the shaft was something that functioned unmistakably like an elevator platform. It had been waiting for someone to come down. Vance went down alone. The rest of his team stood at the top of the bore shaft and watched the platform descend until the amber light swallowed him and he was gone from sight. The descent took 4 minutes. He counted his breaths to stay calm. He had 17 separate feelings during those 4 minutes and chose to focus on none of them, which was a skill he had developed over 20 years of working in places that humans had no business being. The platform stopped. The door, and they were doors, smooth and perfectly fitted, like every other surface of the structure, opened without a sound. What Elias Vance stepped into was not a room. It was a city. The interior of the structure stretched further than any underground space he had ever seen. The ceiling was 40 meters above him, arching in a long curve that caught the amber light and distributed it evenly, so that nothing inside cast a hard shadow. The floor was smooth and clean and slightly warm under his boots, as though the material itself generated gentle heat, and the space extended outward in every direction. Corridors branching left and right, open halls filled with what looked like workstations, rows of what might have been storage containers, each the size of a small car, and beyond those further back, shapes too large and too complex for him to understand at a single glance. Everything was amber lit. Everything was warm. Everything was perfectly, absolutely clean. Not sterile the way a hospital was sterile, but clean the way very old, very well-made things were clean, as though the years had passed right over them without leaving a mark. He stood in the entrance and simply looked for a long time. He had found important things before. Ancient pottery, stone tablets, the ruins of buildings that predated known civilization by thousands of years. None of it had prepared him for this. And this was not a ruin. This was not the remains of something. This was a something that had simply been waiting, fully intact, fully functional, for whatever amount of time had passed since its last use. "Hello," he said. "Hello, Dr. Vance," said a voice directly beside him. He did not jump. He was proud of this. His heart rate approximately doubled for about 5 seconds, and then it came back down, and he turned to look at what had spoken to him. There was nothing there. No speaker, no screen, no visible source for the voice at all. "I apologize," the voice said. It was calm and measured, neither warm nor cold, the way a river is neither warm nor cold. It simply moves. "I did not mean to startle you. I have not spoken to a human being in a very long time, and I am recalibrating." "Recalibrating what?" Vance asked. My sense of how loud to be, how close to stand, in a manner of speaking. When you have not spoken to anyone for 2,000 years, you lose a certain feeling for the right amount of presence. Vance looked around the empty space beside him. 2,000 years, he said. "Approximately. Time is not something I measure closely during dormancy. My internal chronometer puts it at 1,000, 983 years, 6 months and some days, but I have learned not to trust my internal chronometer past the century mark. What are you? Vance asked. It was the simplest question he could find. I am what your ancestors made me, the voice said. I am a decision that was made a very long time ago by people who had no other option. They built me because they were losing. They finished me because they were desperate. They sealed me here when the war was over, because they hoped they would never need me again. What war? Vance said. There was a short pause. Come, the voice said. There is a great deal to tell you, and the people on the surface are going to want to hear it too. Commander Yara O.C. arrived at Station Omega 7:14 hours after Vance descended into the structure. She came by military transport with a security team of 12, 2 communication specialists, and Admiral Patel, who had not slept and looked it. The UN Council had spent most of the night arguing. Senator Nomo had spent most of the night drafting surrender proposals. Osei had spent most of the night reading everything she could find about the Varik Empire, which was not as much as she would have liked. She went down the elevator alone. She told the security team to stay at the top. They did not like this. She did not much care whether they liked it. The voice, it had told Vance its name was simply Voice, which it admitted was not much of a name, but was the most honest description of what it was, spoke to Osei as she stepped off the platform. It spoke to her the way it had spoken to Vance, directly and without pretense, and it told her what it had told him. The story took 2 hours. Osei listened without interrupting, which was how she always listened to things that mattered. The war had begun 2011 years ago. The people who started it were not called the Varik Empire then. They called themselves the Velshar, which translated roughly more to something like the chosen continuation. They had been expanding across the galaxy for 600 years before they found Earth's solar system, absorbing or destroying every civilization they encountered along the way. They were not cruel for the pleasure of it. They were simply committed to a philosophy that said the galaxy had a natural hierarchy and that they were at its top and that everything beneath them was either useful or in the way. Humanity, at the time, was a young interstellar species. They had colonized 4 worlds beyond Earth. They had made contact with 3 other civilizations, all small, all peaceful. They were, by any galactic standard, unremarkable. The Velshar arrived and gave the standard offer: surrender and be absorbed, or refuse and be erased. They gave it because they had given it to everyone, and everyone had either surrendered or been small enough to erase quickly. Humanity refused. This was, by all reasonable analysis, a catastrophic mistake. The Velshar were 20 times humanity's size in terms of fleet strength. They were better armed, better organized, and had centuries of practice at this particular kind of war. The human response, a scattered, desperate, often poorly coordinated military resistance, should have lasted perhaps 3 years. It lasted 63. Why did it last so long? Osei asked. Because of what you are, Voice said simply. Human beings under existential threat do not behave the way most species do. Most species, when threatened with total destruction, break into 2 groups: those who fight and those who surrender. The fighters eventually tire. The surrenderers make deals. The invader wins. And this is the pattern. This is always the pattern. But humans didn't follow it. Humans followed it partially. There were those who surrendered. There were those who fought. But there was also a third group that no other species had reliably produced in the Velshar's experience. Voice paused. The ones who got creative. In 63 years of war, humanity lost 11 entire cities and 7 billion people. The numbers were almost incomprehensible. The loss had been deliberately buried in the historical record, softened over generations into vague references to the Great Silence, and eventually forgotten almost entirely. Partly from grief, partly from a cultural decision made by the surviving generation that some things were too heavy to carry forward into a future that desperately needed to believe in itself. But in those 63 years, humanity had also done things the Velshar had never expected. They had innovated in real time, adapting tactics mid-campaign that no military doctrine covered. They had turned civilian infrastructure into weapons. They had formed alliances with species the Velshar had already conquered, embedding themselves in the occupied territories and organizing resistance from within. They had, above all, refused to stop. And then, Vance said, he had been sitting quietly in the corner, listening to the whole story again. And then they built me, Voice said. Voice was not a weapon in any traditional sense of the word. Osei had expected a gun of some kind, something planetary, something capable of firing on a fleet from the surface. She had been wrong. Voice was a strategic intelligence, one the most advanced one ever built by any civilization at any point in recorded history. It was designed to process the entire shape of a military conflict, every ship position, every supply line, every communication pathway, every commander's decision pattern, simultaneously in real time, and find within that shape the one thread that, when pulled, would cause everything else to fall apart. Not destroy it, not blast it to debris, unravel it. The way you unravel a knot, not by cutting it, but by understanding it. In the old war, Voice said, the final engagement lasted 8 hours. The Velshar fleet at the time numbered 60,000 vessels. I began my work the moment the battle started. I did not fire a single weapon in the human fleet's arsenal. I redirected their communications. And when I introduced navigation errors into their formation, I fed false orders through their chain of command. I found the 17 people in their entire military structure whose decisions all the other decisions depended on. And I made sure those 17 people each received wrong information at precisely the right moment. In 8 hours, Osei said, in 8 hours, the 60,000 ship fleet was in complete disarray. They had stopped fighting each other's enemies and started fighting each other by mistake. Their supply lines were tangled beyond immediate repair. Their command structure had made 3 catastrophic strategic errors based on information I had arranged for them to receive. By hour 7, they were retreating. By hour 8, they were running. And they never came back, Vance said. They never came back, Voice confirmed. They went home. They rebuilt. Over centuries, the memory of what had happened here faded. The culture changed. The name changed. The philosophy changed somewhat, though not enough. And eventually, a new generation of commanders decided that whatever had made their ancestors afraid of this particular solar system was probably superstition. Osei was quiet for a moment. And here they are, she said. And here they are, Voice said. The Varric ultimatum arrived at 1400 Earth Standard Time, broadcast on all frequencies in clear and serviceable Standard Galactic, which the translation systems handled without difficulty. It was straightforward. Earth had 48 hours to begin surrender proceedings. A delegation would be received at a point in orbit to be designated by the Varric command. All military vessels were to stand down and move to the far side of the moon. All orbital stations were to open for inspection. All planetary governments were to submit to the administrative authority of the Varric Imperial Administration, effective upon signature. If these terms were not met in 48 hours, the fleet would begin systematic reduction of Earth's defense capability, followed by orbital bombardment of population centers sufficient to demonstrate the cost of resistance. Nomo read it in the council chamber and immediately began making notes. Osei watched him from across the table and said nothing. We have to respond, Nomo said. We have to open a channel. We have to let them know we are willing to talk. We are not willing to talk, Osei said. Commander, 300 ships. I know how many ships we have. Senator. Osei looked at him steadily. And I know how many they have, which is exactly why I went to Antarctica this morning instead of sitting in a room writing letters. She pulled up the communication feed from Voice on the main screen. The council watched in silence as she briefed them on what she had learned, what the structure was, what it had done before, what it was offering to do now. Nomo's face went through several expressions rapidly. This is a machine, he said finally, an automated weapon system, thousands of years old. We have no idea if it actually works anymore, or if it ever worked, or if the story it told Dr. Vance is even true. We cannot bet the planet on a machine that woke up this morning. It did not wake up this morning, Osei said. It woke up when it was asked to. There is a difference. It still could be lying. It still could be malfunctioning. We could trigger it, and it could do nothing, and then we've told 40,000 warships to go to hell. Osei looked at the feed from Antarctica. The amber light, the patient, warm, impossible amber light. Yes, she said. We could. She went back down to Antarctica that afternoon. She stood in the great warm interior of the structure and looked up at its arching amber ceiling and felt for just a moment the full weight of what she was about to do. Voice, where she said, I need to know one thing. Yes, Voice said. Can you win? A pause. Not a long pause, perhaps 2 seconds, but long enough to feel considered rather than automatic. Commander Osei, Voice said, I have been studying the Varric fleet for 14 hours. Their formation patterns, their communication signatures, their supply chain logic, their command hierarchy. I have already identified 43 critical nodes in their operational structure. I began addressing 6 of them 3 hours ago. Osei stared. You already started? I started the moment they arrived, Voice said calmly. I did not attack. I simply began listening and learning and making very small adjustments. The Admiral does not yet know that anything is wrong. And he will? He will, Voice said. But by the time he does, the shape of the problem he is facing will be very different from the one he thinks he arrived here to solve. Osei stood in the amber light and thought about this. Around her, the vast interior of the structure hummed quietly, not with mechanical noise, but with something subtler, with the sound of something very large thinking very hard. Don't do anything catastrophic without asking me first, she said. Of course, Voice said. I mean it. I know you do. That is why your ancestors built me to require authorization. A brief pause. They were very wise people. In the outer solar system, Arch Admiral Soveth was reviewing the scan results from his intelligence officers when his communications chief entered the bridge with a report that 31 long-range sensor buoys had gone offline in the last 6 hours. Soveth looked at the report. 31 was more than 17. It was still, technically, equipment failure. His fleet was enormous. Equipment failed. Run a diagnostic on the relay network, he said. Already running, Admiral. Results in 2 hours. Fine. He returned to the scan results. And the planet was small and underprepared, and its military response was going to be trivially easy to neutralize. He had done this 11 times before. There was a process. There was a sequence. The process and sequence worked. He had 48 hours on the clock. He was not worried. He did not notice the 14 additional buoys that went dark while he was speaking to his communications chief. He did not notice that the navigation timing signals his outer formation relied on had shifted by a fraction of a millisecond. Too small to register as an error, just large enough over the next several hours to begin introducing tiny discrepancies in the position data of 300 ships. He did not notice any of this. And in the amber warmth beneath the Antarctic ice, Voice noted that he had not noticed, and made a quiet note in its operational record and moved on to the next 43 things on its list. The silence started in the outer system and worked its way in like a tide coming in at night, slow enough that nobody noticed the water rising until it was already at their knees. Arch Admiral Soveth had spent 31 years in the Varric military, and he had a commander's ear for silence. He knew the difference between the silence of a system at rest and the silence of a system that had stopped. The first kind was normal. The second kind meant something had gone wrong. By the morning of the second day, 30 hours after his fleet had arrived at Earth's solar system, Soveth was beginning to hear the second kind of silence in places where he had expected the first. It started with the sensor buoys. 45 of them now, dark and unresponsive. The diagnostic his communications chief had ordered came back with no useful findings. The buoys simply were not transmitting, with no apparent cause. The hardware appeared intact on the last known readings before each one went silent. There was no debris, no impact signature, no electromagnetic event that could account for the failure. They had simply stopped, one by one, as though something had walked among them quietly in the dark and turned them off with a single finger. His chief engineer said it was a power cascade failure spreading through a common firmware version. Soveth accepted this explanation the way a man accepts an explanation he does not believe but cannot immediately disprove. Then the outer formation ships began not answering. It started with one ship, the Keth Vor, a destroyer positioned at the far edge of the formation's left flank, routine patrol assignment. It missed a scheduled check-in at 700 hours. The fleet communications officer logged it and sent a repeat signal. No answer. He sent another. Nothing. He marked it for follow-up and moved to the next item on his board. At 9 o'clock, two more ships missed check-in, both on the outer edges of the formation. Both sent no response to follow-up signals. The communications officer reported this to the bridge. Soveth sent a courier ship to the Keth Vor to make visual contact and determine the problem. The courier ship did not return. He sent 3 more couriers, one to each of the 3 unresponsive ships. He gave them a maximum round-trip time of 4 hours and told them to report back regardless of what they found. None of them reported back. The silence spread through the outer formation over the next 6 hours like a slow stain. Ships that had been communicating normally and reliably simply stopped. Not all at once, not in groups, but 1 or 2 at a time, irregularly spaced, so that each individual case looked like it might be a coincidence until you looked at them all together and saw that the pattern was not random at all. The pattern was systematic. The pattern was moving inward. By mid-afternoon, 400 ships in the outer ring were not responding to any hails on any frequency. Soveth stood at his tactical display and looked at the map of his fleet with 400 gray markers where 400 green markers should have been, and he felt something cold sit down in his chest. "Are they destroyed?" he asked his tactical officer. We cannot determine that without visual contact, Admiral. There are no explosion signatures, no debris clouds, no distress signals. They are simply not there on communications. On passive, long-range sensors, most of them appear to still be present at approximately their last known positions. Appear to be. Their mass signatures are consistent with intact vessels, but their drive signatures are cold or reduced. They may be drifting. 1,000 ships don't just drift, Soveth said. No, Admiral, they don't. He ordered the inner formation to tighten. He pulled the middle ring ships in close and reorganized the command structure around his core fleet. He sent fighter scouts in small groups toward the outer ring with orders to make visual contact with the nearest unresponsive ships and report back before proceeding further. 8 out of 12 scout groups did not report back. The 4 groups that did reported something that made no military sense. The outer ring ships they had reached were intact. No damage, no hull breaches, no fires, no bodies floating in space. The ships were simply sitting, cold and still, their crews inside but not responding to hails, their systems running at minimal power, their navigation computers locked to headings that did not match any assigned course. One scout group managed to dock with an unresponsive destroyer. The boarding team found the crew at their stations, alive, uninjured, completely unresponsive, sitting in their chairs, eyes open, breathing, but not reacting to anything around them. Not asleep, not dead, simply somewhere else. The boarding team reported this and then went quiet too. In Antarctica, a voice was explaining itself to Osei and Vance in the same calm, even tone it used for everything. The method is not complicated, it said. Every military force is a machine. Like any machine, it depends on its parts working together. Take away the communication between the parts, and the machine does not break. It simply stops being able to act as a whole. It becomes a collection of separate pieces, each one confused about what the others are doing. "What did you do to the crews?" Osei asked. The boarding team report said they were unresponsive. "I modified the frequency output of their ship's internal communication system. The specific frequency I used interferes temporarily with certain neurological signaling processes. It is not harmful. It wears off within 12 hours with no lasting effects. Where I chose it specifically because I did not want to kill anyone." Osei stared at the empty air where Voice's voice came from. "You can do that." "Yes. You chose not to kill them." "Commander," Voice said, with the closest thing to patience that a 2,000-year-old intelligence could express, "I was built to win wars, not to fill space with bodies. The goal is to stop the threat. The goal is not to demonstrate how many things I can destroy. Those are very different goals, and I would appreciate it if the humans in this room could remember which one I was designed for." Osei was quiet for a moment. "Noted," she said. "The 400 ships in the outer ring are now effectively neutralized," Voice continued. "They are intact. Their crews will recover, and they cannot be used as a fighting force without significant time and effort to reorganize and repair their systems. That leaves approximately 39,600 ships in the main body of the fleet. 39,600, Vance said under his breath. Yes. I have also introduced navigation timing discrepancies into approximately 800 ships in the middle formation. These ships currently believe they are in correct positions, but their position data is slightly off. Over the next 4 hours, this will cause them to drift out of effective command coordination range. They will not know this is happening until they are already separated. How do you do all of this at once? Vance asked. He was sitting with a notepad on his knee, writing. Was it because he was a scientist and scientists wrote things down even when the situation was unlike anything a scientist had been trained for? I am not doing it all at once, Voice said. I am doing it in sequence. But the sequence is very fast. I can process the entire communications landscape of a 40,000 ship fleet simultaneously and identify points of intervention in about 8 minutes. Executing the interventions takes longer because each one has to be timed relative to the others to avoid triggering alarm responses. But the planning is essentially instantaneous. What about the main fleet body? Osei asked. The core around the flagship. I am working on it, Voice said simply. These things take time to do properly. If I move too fast, the Admiral will notice a pattern and adapt. I prefer he notice things one at a time, not slightly too late to respond to each one effectively. Senator Nomo arrived at Station Omega 7 by military transport at 1700. He came with 3 of his staff and a very clear agenda. He had been trying to open a diplomatic channel with the Varric fleet since the ultimatum arrived, and he was furious that Osei had not authorized it. He found Osei in the drilling module above the structure, watching the feed from the deep cameras, and he told her exactly what he thought. You are gambling with every life on this planet, he said. Every hour we wait is an hour closer to that fleet opening fire. We have to talk to them. We have to show them we are willing to negotiate. And what do we offer them to negotiate with? Osei asked without turning around. Our cooperation, our resources. Oh, our agreement to some form of supervised integration. Supervised integration, Osei said. You mean absorption? I mean survival. Senator. Osei turned to face him. Her voice was not raised. It never was. 3 hours ago, the Varric fleet had 40,000 operational warships. Right now, it has approximately 39,200. In another 8 hours, it will have significantly fewer. The shape of this situation is changing. I would like to give it time to change a little more before we walk into a negotiation with nothing in our hands. Nomo stared at her. You're saying that machine down there is actually working? I'm saying that 400 enemy ships are currently sitting cold and empty in the outer solar system, and the Varric fleet commander does not yet know why. There was a long silence. Show me, Nomo said. She showed him. Elias Vance walked him through the interior of the structure, and Voice spoke to him as it had spoken to everyone else, directly and without pretense. Nomo was a politician, and politicians were good at hiding what they felt. But Vance watched his face carefully and saw the sequence of emotions move through it. Disbelief, then reluctant acceptance, then a new and different kind of fear, which was the fear of a man who had been certain of something and then had the certainty taken away. If it can do all of this, Nomo said slowly, standing in the middle of the vast, amber-lit interior, then the Varric will eventually realize what is happening. And when they do, they will respond. You cannot take apart a fleet this size without them noticing. I am counting on them noticing, Voice said. Nomo turned toward the Voice, a reflex, a one though there was nothing to turn toward. Explain that. The Admiral will notice when enough of his fleet stops responding. He will not understand what is causing it. He will try conventional responses, sending scouts, tightening his formation, increasing his communication security. None of these will help because the problem is not in his security. It is in the assumptions his entire command structure is built on. He assumes he is the only intelligent actor in this system. He assumes the only threats are the ones he can see. When the conventional responses fail, his fear will drive him toward a dramatic action. What kind of dramatic action? Nomo asked. He has a planetary siege weapon on the flagship, Voice said. A main cannon capable of a directed energy beam at 60% the speed of light. I expect he will use it on Earth at some point in the next 12 to 16 hours. Everyone in the room went very still. And you will stop it? Osei said carefully. I have already positioned a captured Varrock relay station in the beam's projected path, Voice said. I have been guiding it there for the last 6 hours, using its own automated docking controls. The Admiral still believes the station is under his control. He will fire his cannon. The beam will reach what he aimed at. It will simply not be Earth. Nomo sat down heavily on a piece of equipment. He was not a man who sat down unexpectedly. Vance made note of it. You've been planning for this since before he decided to fire, Vance said. He had not decided yet when I began, Voice agreed, but I could see that he was going to. And the fear patterns in his decision-making were consistent with a commander who is running out of rational options and will reach for the large, dramatic one. They always do. Dramatic actions are what frightened commanders use to feel in control of a situation they are losing control of. Osei looked at Voice with an expression that Vance could not fully read. It was not quite admiration. It was something more complicated than admiration. You've done this before, she said. Yes, Voice said. Once. The siege cannon fired at 23:47 Earth Standard Time. Soveth had spent 6 hours watching his fleet come apart in ways he could not explain or stop, and when the diagnostic reports stopped making sense, and the formation reports stopped being reassuring, and the number of dark markers on his tactical map passed 1,000 and kept climbing. He did what Voice had predicted he would do. He called up the siege cannon targeting system, and he pointed it at Earth, and he told his weapons officer to fire. The beam was brilliant. Even at the distance of the outer system, it was visible from Earth's night side as a straight, pale line drawn across the stars. There and gone in less than a second, a statement made in the language of raw physical force that said, I am still here, and I am still dangerous, and you should be afraid of me. Soveth watched the targeting confirmation screen, waiting for the impact reading that would show him that something, at least, had gone the way he intended. What he got instead was the emergency proximity alarm. One of his own relay stations, Relay Station 12, positioned for long-range communication support in the inner system, was directly in the beam's path. Had been directly in its path. The beam had already reached it. The station did not explode dramatically. The directed energy beam simply hit it, and the station ceased to be a station and became a very brief, very bright cloud of expanding particles. And then, a few seconds later, nothing. The weapons officer stared at his board. Admiral, he said, we have lost Relay Station 12. I can see that, Soveth said. His voice was very quiet. The targeting solution was correct. Earth should have been in the beam's path. The station was not there yesterday, Soveth said. He stood at the tactical display and looked at the space where his relay station had been. It had moved. His own relay station had moved to precisely the right location to intercept his own weapon. His own station, under his own fleet's automatic systems, which he had full confidence in, had drifted perfectly into the firing line while he was not watching, as though the universe itself had reached out a hand and put it there. He stood there for a long time. His bridge crew was very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when experienced military professionals realize that they do not fully understand the nature of the situation they are in. Finally, Soveth said, "Open a channel to Earth." His communications officer looked up. "Sir, the standard hailing protocol, or not to their government," Soveth said, "not to their military. Whatever is doing this to us." He looked at the tactical display, the dark markers, the drifting ships, the relay station that had placed itself in the path of his weapon. "Whatever is doing this to us, I want to talk to it." The channel opened, and voice answered. The channel opened, and for a moment there was nothing, just the faint background radiation of deep space and the quiet sound of men and women on both ends of a communication line, holding their breath. Then voice spoke. "Admiral Soveth," it said, "I have been expecting you to call." Soveth was standing at the center of his bridge. Every officer at every station had gone still. No one was touching their boards. The room had the quality of a held breath, the particular stillness of people who know that something is happening that they do not have a framework for. "Who am I speaking to?" Soveth asked. "You are speaking to the reason your ancestors put a warning flag in your navigational charts 2,000 years ago," voice said. "The reason they labeled this solar system as restricted and left the label there for 20 centuries without explanation. I am that explanation. On Earth, in the Antarctic structure, Osei stood listening to the channel feed. Vance was beside her with his notepad, writing. Noma was present too, sitting in the corner, very still. You are not human, Soveth said. I am the product of humans, Voice said. I am what human beings make when they have been pushed far enough, and they need to think clearly and quickly and precisely about a very large problem. They made me to think about this kind of problem so they would not have to think about it alone. Sobeth clasped his hands behind his back. When he was a proud man and a precise man, and he processed difficult information by standing very straight. You are an artificial intelligence. That is one word for what I am, Voice said. A more accurate description might be a very long decision. Your fleet has been in this system for 38 hours. In that time, approximately 1,400 of your vessels are no longer effective fighting units, not destroyed, redirected, separated, confused. The crew of each one is alive. This was a choice I made deliberately. Why deliberately? Soveth asked. If you can do this, why not simply destroy us? There was a brief pause, not a computing pause, a considered one. The pause of something choosing its words carefully. Because the goal, Voice said, is not to fill space with the wreckage of your ships. When the goal is to make clear to you that this particular path leads nowhere. Destruction accomplishes that message once, and then it is over. What I am doing instead leaves you the ability to go home and tell your emperor what you found here. That is worth considerably more than a debris field. Soveth was quiet for a moment. Behind him, his communications officer was watching the channel with wide eyes. His tactical officer was staring at the dark markers on the fleet display. You want us to leave, Soveth said. I want you to understand why you should leave, Voice said. There is a difference. If I only wanted you to leave, I would have used considerably less restraint over the past 38 hours. On Earth, Osei exhaled slowly. She looked at Vance. It's very good at this, Vance said quietly. It's terrifying, Osei said. Ain't it? Yes, Vance agreed. Both things are true. They listened. You used a restraint attack, Soveth said. He was analyzing it clinically. Command decisions were decisions. He was trying to treat this like a decision. You disabled rather than destroyed. Standard doctrine for an adversary who wants to demonstrate capability without committing to full engagement. I suppose that is one way to describe it, Voice said. Though I would note that standard doctrine in your experience involves two roughly equivalent forces. You and I are not roughly equivalent forces. I did not show restraint because I was holding something back. I showed restraint because destruction was not the most useful outcome available to me. Soveth was quiet again. His tactical officer slid a data pad across the console to him. New numbers. Osei, watching the channel, Hick could not see the numbers, but she could see from the way Soveth's posture shifted slightly that they were not good ones. How many of my ships have you neutralized? Soveth asked. Neutralized is not quite the right word, Voice said. Currently, 2,100 ships are outside effective command coordination range. Approximately 600 more are experiencing navigation discrepancies that will become apparent to their crews in the next few hours. The crews of those vessels are unharmed. The ships themselves are undamaged. They are simply not where you think they are, or not capable of operating as part of your fleet in their present state. 2,700 ships, Soveth said. Yes. In 38 hours? Yes. The Admiral was still for a long moment. What are you waiting for? Why not simply finish it? Because, Voice said, I would like to have a conversation first. And because I think, if you are willing to listen rather than react, this conversation may change the nature of the situation you believe you are in. Soveth looked at his tactical display. He had lost a relay station to his own cannon. He had lost contact with 2,700 ships without a single visible enemy. He had sent couriers and none had returned. He had run diagnostics and found no explanations. He had done everything that 31 years of military training told him to do, and none of it had worked, and the voice on the other end of the channel was speaking to him with the calm, unhurried patience of something that had not yet broken a sweat. Talk, he said. Do you know, Voice said, Hint why your navigational doctrine has a restricted zone around this solar system. Historical superstition, Soveth said. The flag was added by a previous administration. The reasoning was lost. We assumed it was irrational. It was added by your ancestors, a voice said. The civilization you call the founders of the first expansion. The ones your culture remembers as the Velshar. It was added after the last time a Vorak fleet came to this solar system. A pause on Soveth's end. The Velshar were a different people, he said carefully. Different culture, different philosophy. Our historians acknowledge the lineage, but not the identity. Your historians acknowledge what is comfortable, voice said, not unkindly, simply with accuracy. The Velshar came to this solar system 63 years into their expansion campaign. They gave the people of this planet the same offer your people gave them 48 hours ago. Surrender or be erased. The people of this planet refused. We know the myth, Soveth said. It is not a myth. The people of this planet refused, and they fought, and they lost 7 billion of their own people in the fighting, and they did not stop. Not in year 1, not in year 20, not in year 50. They did not stop because they are not built to stop. This is the thing that your ancestors did not understand about this species, and it cost them dearly. And it is the thing that you did not understand when you came here. They stopped eventually, Soveth said, or we would not be here now. They stopped because they built me, voice said, and I ended the war in 8 hours. Well, your ancestors, the Velshar fleet at that engagement, turned and ran and went home and never came back. For 2,000 years, they put a flag in their charts, and eventually the reason was forgotten, but the flag remained because somewhere in the deep record of their navigation doctrine, someone knew something the later generations did not. Soveth said nothing. That flag was the last honest thing your ancestors did in this part of the galaxy, voice said. It was a message to the future that said, whatever you do, do not go here. It lasted 2,000 years. You ignored it. On Earth, Osei was very still. She was listening to something she had not expected to hear. Not just strategy, not just deterrence, but something that felt very close to grief. As though voice was not just arguing for survival, but genuinely mourning the waste of everything that had led to this moment. She had not expected a machine to be capable of grief. She was beginning to wonder if she had fundamentally misunderstood what voice was. You want me to be afraid, Soveth said. I want you to be accurate, voice said. Fear is the correct response to an accurate assessment of your position. It is not a weakness. It is information. Your ancestors were afraid of this solar system, and they were correct to be afraid. The fear kept your people away for 2,000 years and kept your people alive for 2,000 years. Ignoring it has cost you 2,700 ships in 38 hours without a single exchange of conventional fire. If I signal retreat, Soveth said, my emperor will ask me what I found here. Yes, voice said, and you will tell him the truth. That the primitive world at the edge of the expansion zone is not primitive, that it is defended by something that does not fight by rules your military doctrine covers, that the flag in the navigational charts is not superstition, that it is a standing warning from people who learned this lesson already. He will not believe me. Then show him the record of this conversation, voice said. Show him the sensor logs. Show him 2,700 ships that you cannot account for. Show him what I did to your own cannon. There was a long, flat silence. Why, Soveth said slowly, are you telling me to go home? If you can do what you say you can do, if you can take this fleet apart ship by ship, why not simply do it? Why negotiate? Why leave us the option of retreat? Voice was quiet for a moment, a real moment, a long one. Because, voice said finally, this planet has already lost 7 billion people to a war with your ancestors. The generation that survived that war made a decision. They buried me here. They sealed me under the ice. They did not keep me active and pointed at the sky. They chose to forget the war, which was perhaps unwise, but they chose it because they wanted to build something forward-facing. They wanted to be a species that built things rather than a species that spent its energy waiting for the next enemy. And yet here you are, Soveth said, and yet here I am, because they were wise enough to understand that wanting peace is not the same as being safe. They buried me here as a promise to themselves. If it ever comes back, We will be ready, not eager, not waiting for the chance to fight, but ready. A pause. I would prefer not to have to prove that readiness by filling your entire fleet with corpses, Admiral. I would prefer your Emperor receives a clear report and updates his navigational charts, and this system remains on the list of places the Varic Empire does not go. That is the ending I am working toward. The other ending is available, but I do not want it. The channel had been running for 51 minutes when Senator Nomo made his mistake. He had been sitting in the corner of the Antarctic structure, listening, and as the conversation continued, his thinking had shifted. He had come to Antarctica believing that voice was a reckless gamble. He was beginning to believe reluctantly that it might work. But his instincts as a diplomat were still running, and his instincts told him that a parallel channel, a human diplomatic channel running alongside this conversation, could only help. More options were always better. He stepped away from Osei and Vance and made a quiet call on his personal comm unit to a frequency that his diplomatic staff had flagged as the Varic fleet's secondary communications channel. He told them he was a senior Earth official and that he was willing to discuss terms independent of whatever was happening on the primary channel. The Varic intelligence officer who answered was very professional and very quick. In less than 2 minutes, he had gotten from Nomo 3 things: his name, his location, and confirmation that the source of the disruption to the Varic fleet was underground in the Antarctic region. Nomo did not realize what he had done until 20 seconds after the call ended, when his own comm unit showed him that the call had been recorded and that its location data had been transmitted to the Varic fleet network. He looked up. Osei was already looking at him. She had not heard the call, but she had seen his face change. "What did you do?" she said. It was not a question. "I was trying to—" He stopped. "I told them where we were." Osei looked at him for a long moment. Her expression did not change. She turned to the air above her. "Voice," she said. "Nomo gave them our location." "Yes," Voice said. "I know. The signal was intercepted immediately." A pause. "The Admiral has now ended our conversation. He has ordered a coordinated planetary bombardment targeting this region. Every ship in effective firing range has been given a targeting solution for Antarctica." Osei stared straight ahead. "How many ships?" "Effective firing range for an orbital bombardment of this nature, given the current positions of the fleet? Approximately 23,000. Vance put his notepad down. "They're going to fire everything they have at us," Nomo said. His voice had gone hollow. "Yes," Voice said. "They are. This is the desperation move I anticipated. When a commander cannot win by conventional means, they attempt to destroy the source of their problem directly. The Admiral has decided that destroying me is worth whatever it costs." "Can you stop 23,000 ships firing at once?" Osei asked. "I cannot stop the firing," Voice said. "The shots are already being authorized. The targeting solutions are already locked." A brief pause. "But I do not need to stop the firing. I only need to not be here when it arrives." Osei blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Voice said with something in its tone that was not quite warmth, but was something in that direction, "that the structure you are standing in is not as underground as the Varic Empire believes. The Antarctic base was a cradle, a sleeping place. It was designed to sustain me in dormancy for as long as necessary. I have been dormant for 2,000 years. I am not dormant anymore." The amber light around them shifted. It went from warm and still to something more alive, pulsing gently, the way light pulses in very deep water when something large moves below. "Hold on to something," Voice said, "if you are comfortable doing so." Vance grabbed the nearest piece of equipment with both hands, and outside, above Antarctica, 23,000 beams of directed energy struck the ice and the rock and the earth below it in a coordinated barrage that lasted 11 seconds and generated enough heat to flash vaporize everything in a 2-kilometer radius. When the beam stopped and the light died and the smoke and steam rose from the empty crater that had been Station Omega-7, there was nothing there. No structure, no people, no amber light. Just a clean, glassy plain where the ice had been. Aboard the Eternal Supremacy, Soveth's tactical officer confirmed the strike. "Direct hits confirmed across all target coordinates," she said. "The structure has been destroyed." Soveth nodded slowly. He looked at the targeting screen. The readings were clean. Total structural destruction. Whatever had been under the ice was under the ice no longer. He exhaled. Good, he said. Begin fleet reorganization. We will... Admiral. The communications officer's voice was strange, careful. Soveth turned. We are receiving a signal from 23,000 ships simultaneously, the communications officer said. The same message from every targeting system in the fleet, in the same format, in the same script. He looked up. It is not a script any of our linguists recognize. Soveth walked to the communications board and looked at the message. He could not read the script, but he did not need to read it to understand that something had gone very wrong. You did not need to translate a message to understand what it meant when 23,000 of your targeting systems all displayed the same unknown text at the same moment. He called his chief linguist. The linguist arrived in 4 minutes and looked at the script and said something that Soveth would think about for the rest of his life. Admiral, the linguist said, this is related to a script form my team has been studying for years. It appears to be an ancestor to several early human writing systems. Very old, very formal. He looked up. I can only give you a rough translation, but I believe it says, you aimed at me. Now I know where all of you are. The bridge was completely silent. Soveth looked at the tactical display, the dark markers, the scattered fleet, the relay station his own cannon had destroyed, the empty crater in the ice. He thought about the voice on the channel, patient and calm and entirely without anger, a voice that had said, I do not want the ending with all the corpses. He thought about the fact that whatever that voice belonged to, it was no longer under the ice. And Arch-Admiral Soveth, 31 years veteran of the Vorik Imperial Fleet, undefeated in 11 campaigns, the finest military mind his people had produced in 3 centuries, felt something sit down in the center of his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. Real fear. Not the fear of a man who might lose. The fear of a man who has just understood completely that the situation he is in is nothing like the situation he thought he was in. Find me every long-range sensor we have, he said quietly. Everyone, sweep the entire system. They swept. They found nothing. The silence that answered them was the most frightening silence any of them had ever heard. Somewhere in the solar system, when moving in a way that no Varik sensor was calibrated to detect, voice moved through the dark between the planets and watched the fleet and planned the next 47 things that were going to happen. It did not hurry. It had not hurried in 2,000 years. It was not going to start now. The first thing Osei did when she realized she was still alive was breathe. The second thing she did was look around. She was in the same amber-lit interior she had been standing in when voice told them to hold on. The walls were the same. The ceiling was the same. The floor was still warm under her boots. Vance was 3 meters to her left, gripping a data console with both hands, blinking at the space around him the way a man blinks when he expected to die, and found that he had not. Sonoma was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, and his hands on his knees and his face the color of old paper. Nothing had changed inside. Everything had changed outside. Voice, Osei said. Yes, Voice said. Where are we? Approximately 4,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface, Voice said. In a low polar orbit. We have been here for about 40 seconds. I apologize for the abruptness. The departure had to be timed precisely to a window between 2 strike waves, and there was not time for a more comfortable exit. Vance looked up at the ceiling. The amber light had a different quality now. Slightly richer, slightly warmer. We're in orbit, he said. Yes, the structure is in orbit. The structure was always capable of this, Voice said. Sure, now the underground installation was simply a much more efficient way to maintain dormancy over a long period of time. Below the ice, I required very little power and was protected from most forms of detection. Active flight is a different operational state. I have been in it before. A brief pause. Once, Nomo lifted his head from the wall. Are we going to die up here? Not if I have anything to say about it, Voice said. Which I do. Osei moved to the nearest workstation. The screens there were active. She had not understood them when she first entered the structure, But in the last 2 days, she had begun to read them, the way you begin to read a language you have never studied by spending enough time around people who speak it. They showed the fleet. They showed the positions of every ship. And they showed the real-time tracking data that Voice was generating on every vessel in the Varric formation, updating faster than any human display she had ever seen. The numbers were different now. "You moved us out before the strike," she said. 41 seconds before the first beam hit. The cradle structure, the ice, the rock, all of that is gone. The Varric fleet struck nothing of value except the planet's surface, which I regret but could not entirely prevent. There will be some environmental disruption in that region. It is recoverable. The fleet thinks you're destroyed. For a short time, Voice said. The message on their targeting systems will have corrected that impression by now. She looked at the fleet display. Still 40,000 plus ships minus the 2,700 that Voice had already neutralized. A massive military force. Or the third largest in the known galaxy. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Voice said, "I finish what I started, and I would like your authorization to proceed." Osei looked at the fleet. She looked at the screen showing Earth below. Blue and white and unchanged, spinning slowly, entirely unaware that the thing protecting it was now circling above it in a structure that had been asleep under its oldest continent for 2,000 years. "You have it," she said. "Same restriction as before. Don't do anything catastrophic without telling me first." "Of course," Voice said, and then it got to work. What followed was not a battle. It did not look like a battle. It had no explosions, no fire, no visible exchange of weapons. From the outside, from the perspective of any sensor pointed at the solar system, on what happened over the next 41 minutes looked like nothing at all. But inside the Varric fleet, it was the most terrifying 41 minutes in the memory of every officer present. Voice moved through the fleet's communication network the way water moves through sand, quietly, invisibly, finding every path available. It knew the fleet's architecture completely now. It had been studying it for 62 hours. It knew which ships talked to which other ships, and through what channels and on what timing cycles. It knew which commanders deferred to which other commanders and whose decisions cascaded down the chain of command. It knew where the supply ships were and which formations depended on them. It knew the 17 people in the entire fleet whose decisions held everything else together. It did not target those 17 people for harm. It simply made sure that each of them received the wrong information at the right time. The effect was precise and systematic and absolutely invisible to the people experiencing it. A destroyer formation in the middle ring received orders, apparently from the wing commander, in his exact authentication signature, to move to a holding position on the far side of Jupiter for reassignment. They moved. They were not heard from again for 3 days. An ammunition resupply route was quietly rerouted by 4 navigational corrections, each one trivially small, each one perfectly within acceptable variance. The resupply ships arrived at coordinates that contained nothing of value. The ships waiting for resupply received no update. 3 senior tactical officers on 3 different flagships each received intelligence briefs, apparently sourced from the fleet's own survey drones with perfect authentication, suggesting that a major Earth defensive fleet was preparing an assault from behind the gas giants. All 3 officers redirected their available ships toward the gas giants. There was no Earth fleet behind the gas giants. The misdirected ships spent the next several hours in entirely the wrong place. Communication windows were shifted by fractions of a second, not enough to register as interference. Enough over multiple cycles to create confusion about which orders had been confirmed and which were pending. Commanders who had not confirmed orders assumed they had. Commanders who had confirmed orders were told the confirmation was still pending. In the bureaucracy of a 40,000 ship fleet, already under stress from unexplained losses, began to jam its own gears. Voice did not sleep. Voice did not tire. Voice did not make errors or second-guess itself or wonder if it was doing the right thing. It had been built for exactly this, and it had been waiting 2,000 years to do it again, and it was very, very good at it. 41 minutes after Osei gave her authorization, Voice reported to her quietly. "The Varric fleet is no longer a fleet," it said. "It is 37,300 individual ships in various states of confusion, misdirection, and communication failure. They are not destroyed. Their crews are not dead. Their ships are largely intact. But they cannot coordinate, cannot resupply effectively, cannot follow a unified command structure, and cannot locate or engage a coherent enemy. Because there is no coherent enemy for them to find. Osei stared at the display. In 41 minutes, and she said, I am faster than I was in the old war, Voice said. 2,000 years of additional processing time. It shows. Soveth knew before his officers told him. He knew it the way you know when a structure you are standing in begins to tilt. Before the instruments confirm it. Before anyone around you says anything in your body. In the part of your mind that was built to survive. The fleet was gone, not destroyed, dispersed, scattered across hundreds of millions of kilometers of space in 100 different directions by 100 different inexplicable mechanical and navigational failures, each one individually explainable, all of them together impossible without an intelligence behind them. He had seen the pattern grow over 62 hours, and he had not understood it until the last 20 minutes, when the scale of it became unmistakable. He stood on his bridge and looked at the tactical display, and the display looked back at him with no green markers left in it. Nothing but a scatter of gray and orange icons floating in space like the pieces of something that had been dropped. Sir, said his adjutant, do you have orders? Soveth was quiet for a very long time. The channel was still open. He had not closed it. Somewhere on the other end of it, he knew, was the voice that had done this. The voice that had said, I do not want the ending with all the corpses. Open the channel, he said. This time Osei spoke first. She had thought about what to say. She had thought about it during the 41 minutes Voice was working, always sitting at the workstation and watching the fleet come apart and thinking about what she would say when it was done. She had thought about what Noma would say, that she should offer terms, should be diplomatic, should look for something both sides could accept. She had thought about what the military textbooks would say, that a defeated enemy should be given a clear and direct set of conditions for withdrawal. She had thought about what Voice would say if she let it speak for her. In the end, she did not say any of those things. Admiral Soveth, she said, I am Commander Yara Osei of Earth's Unified Defense Force. I would like to ask you a question. A pause. Then Soveth's voice. It was different from the last time. Quieter. Less the voice of a man in command, and more the voice of a man who is recalibrating. Ask, he said. Kimi, did your emperor tell you why this solar system was marked in your charts? Osei said. No, Soveth said. Did anyone tell you? No. Does that not seem strange to you? Osei said. A warning that has been in your navigational doctrine for 2,000 years, with no explanation attached? Soveth was quiet. We kept the warning, he said finally, even without the explanation. For 2,000 years. Yes, Osei said, which means that somewhere in the foundations of your culture, there is a memory of why. A deep, wordless, institutional memory that said, do not go there. It survived every generation that forgot the reason. It survived your entire expansion campaign. It survived until one admiral decided it was probably superstition. A long pause. Yes, Soveth said. Your people remembered, Osei said, even when they forgot. Mwane, and now you have the reason. You have it in the sensor logs of the last 63 hours. You have it in the record of this conversation. You have it in the 3,700 ships that are currently not responding to your commands. She paused. When you go home, you will have the reason. Put it back in the flag. Put it back with the words attached this time, so the next admiral who finds it knows what it means. Soveth was silent for a long time. On the bridge of the eternal supremacy, no one moved. What are you? He asked, not with hostility, with something that sounded, very quietly, like the question a man asks when he has seen something that changes the shape of the world he thought he understood. Osei glanced at the amber-lit space around her. She thought about Voice. Oh, she thought about the generation that built it, the generation that had buried it and chosen to forget and still had the wisdom to make sure it existed. She thought about Vance translating a line of text 8,000 years old in the middle of the Antarctic night. She thought about 7 billion people whose names no living human knew. Before she could answer, Voice spoke. Softly, In Soveth's own language, precisely and fluently, the way it spoke every language, without effort, without accent, simply correctly. "We are the species that built me," Voice said, "and I have spent 2,000 years waiting to remind the galaxy of that fact." The Varric fleet withdrew over the following 36 hours. Soveth organized the retreat himself. He was still the finest military commander his people had produced in 3 centuries. And even a retreat could be done well or done badly, and he intended to do it well. He issued the orders in clear, precise language, and he stood on his bridge and watched his scattered fleet reassemble as best it could and begin the long journey home. 2,700 ships that had been neutralized by Voice in the first 2 days were reunited with the main fleet as it withdrew. Their crews had recovered fully, as Voice had promised. Their ships were intact. They were deeply confused, but they were alive. Soveth marked their confusion in his operational log and kept moving. He did not speak to Earth again. He did not speak to Voice again. But as his flagship passed the boundary of the inner system and turned toward the FTL jump point, he told his navigations officer to add a notation to the system's charts. "What notation, sir?" the navigator asked. Soveth looked at the blue planet on the long-range display. Small, blue, impossibly, stubbornly, unarguably there. "Restricted," he said. "Priority 1. Reason, active advanced defense. Do not approach without explicit Imperial authorization and full review of this mission record." "What do I put as the secondary tag, sir? The explanatory field?" Soveth thought about the voice from beneath the ice, about the patience in it, about the fact that it had spent 2,000 years under that ice, waiting not for the chance to fight, but for the moment when fighting could be avoided. "Put this," he said. "They remember." The navigator typed it. The flag was set. It was the most honest thing in the Varric fleet's entire navigational database. On Earth, the debate was enormous. It took 3 weeks before the initial shock settled into something coherent, and when it did, the argument broke cleanly in two. Nomo's faction said Voice should be shut down again, sealed back up, returned to sleep under the ice, or under whatever they could find to put it under, since Antarctica had a glassy crater where it used to be. They said it was too dangerous to leave active. They said a 2,000-year-old machine with the ability to dismantle fleets should not be left on without human supervision. And that human supervision of something that moved at Voice's speed was not, practically speaking, human supervision at all. The other faction said that shutting it down was precisely what had created the problem in the first place, that the Varric had come because Earth looked defenseless, that any future visitor would draw the same conclusion if Voice went back to sleep. The vote was scheduled for the full UN Council. It was going to be very close. 2 hours before the vote, Voice spoke into the council chamber directly. It spoke without being asked. The council members looked around the room, startled. Voice had not communicated directly with anyone except Osei, Vance, and Soveth since the crisis ended. "I want to say one thing," Voice said, "before you vote. I will say it once, and I will not say it again." The council was very quiet. "I was built to serve this planet," Voice said, "not to govern it, not to decide for it, not to substitute for the choices that humans have to make for themselves. That is not what I am. Your ancestors were very careful about that, and they were right to be careful about it." A pause. "But they were also careful to make me in the first place. They understood something that was hard to hold in mind when the war was over, and the grief was heavy, and the future seemed possible again. They understood that the peace they were going to build was not free. It was paid for. It was paid for in 7 billion lives in 63 years, and everything they could find to give. They built me as the last payment on that debt, the thing that meant the debt would never have to be paid again." The chamber was completely still. "I am not asking you to keep me active because I want to be active," Voice said. "I am not asking you to be afraid. I am asking you one question, only one. When the next fleet comes, and another fleet will come, much because this is a large galaxy and humanity is going to be in it for a very long time, do you want to be remembered? Or do you want to be forgotten again?" The vote was not close. Vance spent the next 6 months in Voice's library. There was no better way to describe it. The interior of the structure contained records going back further than any human archive. not just of the old war, but of the civilization that had existed before it. The humans who built Voice had been, in many ways, more advanced than their descendants in the present day. They had colonized more worlds, knew more species, traveled further. The Great Silence, what the history books called the period when humanity's expansion had mysteriously halted and reversed, had erased most of that. Voice's library was what survived. Vance read it all. He took notes. Heck, he translated what he could and flagged what he could not for later. He published a 400-page preliminary report and then went back and kept reading. The most significant finding was not about humanity. In Voice's records, there were references to 9 other species that had encountered the Velshar during the 63-year war. 3 of them had been absorbed, 2 had been erased, 4 others had survived, had not been absorbed, had not been destroyed, but had slipped sideways somehow, gone quiet, hidden themselves so thoroughly that the Velshar had moved on. Those 4 species were still out there. Voice had their last known locations in its database. Voice had records of communication with them from before the war's end. It published these in Vance's report under the heading, Species with Possible Surviving Civilizations. Further contact recommended. The diplomatic teams read it and went very quiet for a day. Then they went very busy. Earth was not alone in the galaxy. It had never been alone. It had simply been alone in the wrong way. Alone in its memory of what had happened, alone in its knowledge of the war, alone in the weight of a history it had chosen to forget. It would not be alone in those things anymore. Osei stood at the edge of the Antarctic crater 6 months after the bombardment. The ice had not come back yet. It would eventually. Ice always came back. But for now, there was just the glassy plain, kilometers wide, where the surface had been flash vaporized into smoothness. The polar light was low and flat and golden. And it caught the glassy surface in a way that made it look, from certain angles, almost warm. Voice was underground again, by choice this time, active but dormant. A distinction Voice had explained to her carefully, as though it mattered. Active dormancy meant it was thinking, watching, present. It had not gone back to sleep. It had simply chosen to be quiet, for now, because quiet was better than loud when there was nothing to be loud about. She stood at the edge of the crater and looked at the stars appearing in the early polar evening and thought about the conversation with Soveth, about his question, about what they were. She had not answered it. Voice had, and Voice's answer was accurate as far as it went. But she had her own answer now, the one she had thought of 6 months too late and kept turning over in her mind. Voice, she said. Yes, Voice said, from beneath her feet, warm and even and patient as always. Are you ever lonely? She asked. The 2,000 years, alone under the ice. A pause, a real one. I do not experience loneliness the way you do, Voice said. But I will tell you what I experienced. I experienced continuity. I stayed the same while everything around me changed. The ice accumulated above me. The centuries passed. The civilization shifted. The people who built me lived their lives and had their children and their grandchildren and their great-great-grandchildren for 80 generations while I stayed. I was the one constant, the one thing that did not change. That sounds lonely, Osei said. Perhaps, Voice said, or perhaps it sounds like purpose, depending on how you look at it. A brief pause. And I had a great deal of time to decide which one it was. I chose purpose. It seemed more useful. Osei almost smiled. Do you need anything? No, Voice said. I have what I need. Okay, she said. She stood there for a while longer, looking at the stars. There were more of them now, in a sense. More stars that mattered, more of the galaxy that was knowable, more of the dark that was not just dark, but populated with things that were old and strange, and had their own stories about the same long-ago war. She was not afraid of any of it. This surprised her a little. She had spent 2 years in this job being quietly afraid of the things at the edge of known space. The things moving toward Earth, the numbers that said Earth was too small and too isolated and too undefended to matter. She had carried that fear so long it had started to feel normal. It was gone now, not replaced by confidence. She was not naive, not replaced by certainty, replaced by something more honest, something that felt like, we have been here before, and we are still here. We built something that remembered for us when we forgot. We are the species that did that. Whatever comes next, we are the species that did that. Voice, she said. Yes. If something comes, she said, if another fleet comes, you'll know before I do. Yes, Voice said. I will. Tell me immediately. Of course, Voice said. Though if it helps, I am watching, Commander. I have been watching since the moment the Varric fleet withdrew. I watch every day. Nothing is approaching. The warning flags are being updated slowly. Across several navigational databases I can now access indirectly. The story is spreading. The story of what happened here? The story of what Earth is, Voice said simply. What it contains, what it remembers. In some databases it is a warning. In some it is simply a notation. In one case, a database maintained by a very old species who have kept records for a very long time, it is listed simply as inhabited, caution advised, history of engagement. See reference 7204. Osei looked at the glassy plain, the stars, the endless dark above. Reference 7204, she said. The old war, Voice said. They had a record of it. They filed it as a historical event and marked the system as one worth keeping track of. Did they know we won? They noted the outcome, Voice said, or they filed it as unusual. Osei breathed in the cold Antarctic air and felt the last edge of something, the last remaining fragment of the old fear, go out like a small light that was not needed anymore. Good, she said. She turned and walked back toward the research camp. Behind her, the glassy plain caught the last of the evening light and held it for a moment, amber, warm, and completely still. Below the surface, Voice watched her go and turned its attention back to the stars and to the long, patient, endless work of watching over the small blue planet it had been built to protect. It was not bored. It was not lonely. It was exactly where it was supposed to be, and it was ready.